Hi, good evening all of you and welcome to a new episode of Arguably the Reading Quest. So this is the second part of the series, Greatest Philosophical Novels of All Times. So in this series again we are going to discuss 5 more novels as usual. And please mind it, this is not any attempt to rate the novel. So the serial orders are determined as random, as I have already discussed in the previous video. Please do watch the video till the end. So the first novel that comes to my mind for this series today is Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. So Nausea is a story of a writer who wants to write, who meditates on life, culture, society, politics, and who simply wants to live. So Nausea is a story of a person who is wanting to live, and how nauseating it would be to live when you imagine that nothing holds you back, you're completely free. So Nausea is a novel where Sartre introduces the concept of existential angst. Existential angst is a concept, and angst is a German word that cannot be translated into English. It's a concept that an anxiety envelops you when you come to the realization that you're completely free and nothing holds you back. So Nausea, as Iris Murdoch says, is a meditation on art and existence, politics and society. Nausea, which calls the tour de force of a young man and has become a staple novel in the existentialist reading list. So it has developed a cult following, it has developed a cult status of itself. So in this series I would also quote, as I have always been quoting, but this series I am keeping it very short, 10 to 12 to 15 minutes, wherein I'll quote 1 or 2 excerpts from the novel itself that will give you an idea, gist what the novel is about, what you can expect. He was free in every way, free to behave like a fool or a machine, free to accept, free to refuse, free to equivocate, to marry, to give up the game, to drag this death wet about with him for years to come. He could do what he liked. No one had the right to advise him. There would be for him no good nor evil unless he thought them into being, says Jean-Paul Sartre in Nausea. So I hope that gives you a glimpse of what to expect. An iconic novel. Please do read. The next novel that comes to my mind is the much discussed Trial. As per Vladimir Nabokov, Kafka remains one of the greatest German writer of our times. So with Trial, comes a world where bureaucratic machinery is wedded with the maddening totalitarianism of our time. And no wonder it has created, chilling effects across generations of readers. So it's a terrifying tale of Joseph K., a bank employee who suddenly woke up one day to be arrested for a charge which he has no idea about, and about which the authorities also know nothing. He hires a lawyer to defend himself, but he was unable to communicate to his lawyer that on what charges he was arrested, and the lawyer was fighting a case of which nothing was known. So everything was in dark and in utter state of nihilism. So when you read Trial, you will imagine as if you are in a world where nameless and headless people are walking in a labyrinthine corridor of law and bureaucracy, and they have no respite. So, as I told, and it's an existential tale, a parable or a prophecy of the excesses of modern bureaucracy wedded with maddening totalitarianism. So, and in the end, Joseph K. was executed. He was murdered by the authorities for a charge which he knows nothing about. So Trial concerned troubled individual in a nightmarishly, impersonal world. One quote that will help you, glimpse the mood of the novel is that, am I to realize that not even struggling a whole life with my case has taught me anything? Am I to leave this world as a man who shies away from all conclusions? Are people to say of me after I am gone that at the beginning of the case I wanted to finish it and at the end I wanted it to begin again? Says Kafka. So please read the trial. The next novel that comes to my mind is Immortality by Milan Kundera. While Milan Kundera rose to its prominence by writing The Unbearable Lightness of Being, but his place in existentialist writers was ascertained. His place in philosophical novels was ascertained by Immortality. It's very difficult to categorize what this book is about, but it is a kind of trying to find a sense and meaning of life, in through the ever-flowing process of art and literature. More so when the writers of those art and literature, the creator of those arts and literature are gone, and when they look back and see, whether the writings have made them immortal or not. So you can find, in this book, Ernest Hemingway and Goethe conversing with each other in heaven when they are dead, and they look back and see, how people are receptive of their art. So this passage is full of this book is full of overwhelmingly philosophical passage. So it's again a tryst with musings in philosophy. One quote that particularly comes to my mind is, "I think, therefore I am," is the statement of an intellectual who underrates toothaches. "I feel, therefore I am" is a truth much more universally valid, and it applies to everything that is alive. "Myself does not differ substantially from yours in terms of its thought. Many people, few ideas. We all think more or less the same, and we exchange, borrow, steal thoughts from one another. However, when someone steps on my foot, only I feel the pain. So the basis of the self is not thought, but suffering, which is the most fundamental of all feelings. While it suffers, not even a cat can doubt its unique and uninterchangeable self. In intense suffering, the world disappears and each of us is alone with his self. Suffering is the university of egocentricism," says Milan Kundera. So just ponder on the intense philosophy of Kundera and enjoy reading the book. The next book that comes to my mind immediately is The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse. So it is the magnum opus produced by Hermann Hesse after a gap of 11 years in his writing. He took a break of 11 years from his writing, and then he came up with this novel, The Glass Bead Game. So the Glass Bead Game is set in a distant post-apocalyptic future, and it tells the life story of Joseph Knetsch. Joseph Knetsch was at the beginning a young scholar who was admitted to Castelia, in the kingdom of Castelia, kind of a gurukul, wherein he finally graduates to become the master of the game, and the game is called Glass Bead Game. Hesse never tells us what is the game all about, but the game involves the highest knowledge of mathematics, philosophy, all forms of knowledge, and it's a genre blend of science fiction, fantasy, fictional biography, tossed with musicology, poetry, and Hess' unique tryst with the Eastern and the Western philosophy. And to be fair, the Nobel Prize singled it out when it gave Hesse the prize for literature in 1946. But finally, at the end of the novel, Magister Ludi, the boy Joseph Knetsch, who finally became the master of the game, finally steps down to leave the kingdom of Castelia, to have his own tryst with the real world. And I believe that is the real message of the book, is that only wisdom is not sufficient. You also need to have a tryst with the real world. So wisdom and wisdom put in contact with the real world. And no wonder the book was written at the time when the world was troubled by the Second World War, and it was a hugely devastating time. what I call the knowledge of self that is so very visible in Dostoevsky, the knowledge of self that is so very visible in Schopenhauer. So immediately after Dostoevsky and Schopenhauer, when it comes to the knowledge of self, the one and only one writer that comes to my mind is Hermann Hesse. Let Hermann Hesse speaks for himself, and I quote him from this book. What you call passion is not a spiritual force, but friction between the soul and the outside world. Where passion dominates, that does not signify the presence of greater desire and ambition, but rather the misdirection of these qualities toward an isolated and false goal, with a consequent tension and sultriness in the atmosphere. Those who direct the maximum force of their desires toward the center, toward true being, toward perfection, seem quieter than the passionate souls, because the flame of their fervor cannot always be seen. In argument, for example, they will not shout or wave their arms, but I assure you they are nevertheless burning with subdued fire, says Hermann Hesse in Glass Bead Game. Another excerpt that is very interesting, that appears very interesting to me, is the conversation between the master, that is Magister Ludi, when he was a student with his own teacher. So Joseph speaks to his teacher. Oh, if only it were possible to find understanding, Joseph exclaimed. If only there were a dogma to believe in. Everything is contradictory, everything tangential. There are no certainties anywhere. Everything can be interpreted one way and then interpreted in the opposite sense. The whole of world history can be explained as development and progress, and can also be seen as nothing but decadence and meaninglessness. Isn't there any truth? Is there no real and valid doctrine? Now the master replies. The master had never heard him speak so fervently. He walked on in silence for a little and then said, "There is truth, my boy, but the doctrine you desire, absolute, perfect dogma that alone provides wisdom, does not exist. You should not long for a perfect doctrine, my friend. Rather, you should long for the perfection of yourself. The deity is within you, not in ideas and books. Truth is lived, not taught. Be prepared for conflicts." Joseph Knetch. I can see that they had already have begun. So please enjoy the Glass Bead Game. The next novel that immediately comes to my mind in the post-war America is written by Saul Bellow. He was a Nobel Prize winner in literature. So I am talking of Herzog. This novel is particularly very close to my heart. So Herzog is a story of a failed man. He's a failed man, he's a failed teacher, he's a failed scholar, he's a failed friend, he's a failed husband. His wife ran away with his own friend. And he was an utter failure. He was the noblest example of the failure that we can imagine. And then he sits on the sofa and contemplates the fate of the human condition. And then he writes letters. So this novel is also epistolary in a sense. And the letters were written to the acquaintances of Herzog, but never to be posted. So through these letters, Herzog tells his story. So Herzog is a portrait of an introspective, reclusive, troubled, nihilist man who just contemplates the failure. Saul Bellow has expressed his fear that human species is losing its foothold on sanity, and that the individual person is losing his capacity to comprehend ideas and to feel genuine emotions. Lacking necessary, justifiable ideologies, we are thrown back upon ourselves, only to discover our own emptiness. So it is this crisis of identity which is at the heart of Saul Bellow's novel. See this quote. Considering his whole life, he realized that he has done wrong in everything. In everything, his life was, as they say, ruined. But since he in the first place was not worth much, there was no particular reason for regret. Reflecting on the sticking so far about the centuries, the 19th, the 16th, the 18th, he found in the last saying he liked, grief is a kind of laziness. So Herzog tells us a story that, how in our time all the certainty and all the optimism of Western philosophy has failed. See this quote, that is a defining and a definitive quote from Saul Bellow's Herzog. My life would prove a different point altogether. Very tired of the modern form of historicism which sees in this civilization the defeat of the best hopes of Western religion and thought. What Heidegger calls the second fall of man into the quotidian or ordinary. No philosopher knows what the ordinary is, has not fallen into it deeply enough. The question of ordinary human experience is the principal question of these modern centuries. Montag and Pascal, otherwise in disagreement, both clearly saw, and what they have seen, the strength of a man's virtue or his spiritual capacity measured by his ordinary life. So a very new definition of spirituality, a very new definition of man's strength. That how he bears the ordinariness, the humdrums, the everydayness of his everyday life. That is what the novel is all about. A powerful novel on failure and how to accept and live through the failure and how to accept failure in all its novelty. While Saul Bellow writes a novel, Herzog, the theme is certainly defined by fail better, as Samuel Beckett says. So please read Saul Bellow Herzog. Dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you have still not liked, share and subscribed my YouTube channel, Arguably the Reading Quest, please do. Please keep watching. Thank you so much.